Connections are important in life. Whether you connect with a family member, a friend, a pet, an event in your life, connections are important. And nowhere else is that true than these two inanimate objects directly behind me. They're connected, not just in the physical sense of a coupling like that, but they're connected through history. And that history is January 15th, 1953. GG-1 behind me went through the floor of Union Station 5 days, yes, 5 days before the Eisenhower inauguration. It just so happened that this crane over here, the Washington Terminal 500, happens to be the one, amongst one or two others, but the one that is on record in a photograph that started pulling cars out of track 16 in Union Station. So, I'm Trevor from History on the Move. I'm here at the B&O Railroad Museum. I'm up at the restoration shop. And anytime you take the train ride and you head out west, you will see these two objects behind me. And they're coupled. They're connected. Not just in a physical sense, but in a historical sense. So sit back, relax, enjoy this episode as much as I have been making it, because this is some really neat history. So as we start off this episode by saying, there is a connection here. Not just in the physical sense, but in a historical sense. And I think this is a fascinating story that needs to be told. So, how did I come across this, you may ask? Well, in a railroad history magazine, called Railroad History, it's a journal, peer-reviewed, all that good stuff, there was an article in the Spring-Summer 2017 edition by a guy named Nick Fry. I forget who his co-author was, we'll drop it somewhere on the screen. That talked about, they retold the story of the GG-1 4876 going through the floor of Union Station on January 15th, 1953, 5 days before the Eisenhower inauguration. And what I found absolutely just mind-blowing about this was in one of the photographs, and I'll flash it on the screen for you. In this photograph, you can clearly see on the right-hand side, there in the long trench coat, there is John D. Swafford, who's the Washington Terminal Wreck Master. And you can see the GG-1 below him as as Swafford looks over everything. And I've circled it for you in red, but in the very back of the photo, and it's captioned here by the photographer, is that Washington Terminal crane number 500 was the first one on the scene and the first one to begin pulling coaches off of track 16 in DC. And I think this is absolutely just mind-blowing that we have these two items right here at the B&O Railroad Museum. And so this is a story that we're going to recount for you. Now, we're not going to go into all the details of what happened and who's at fault and, all that good stuff. There were multiple investigations, ICC, Interstate Commerce Commission, and the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, heck, even the Senate got in on the action here. But we're not going to really get into that. That's not really what the point of this is. I want to take you inside the GG-1 and inside the terminal crane here and just give you a really good idea of perhaps what it was like in these things as they commingled, if you will, on the morning of January 15th. So this is a fun one for me to make, and I really hope you enjoy this. All right, so I'm standing outside of here, the GG-1. Now, do I know everything there is to know about a GG-1? Nope, absolutely do not. But what I believe here is important is the quick synopsis of this is the Federal Express. Okay, so that's a train that runs on two different railroads back in 1953. It starts in Boston on the New Haven and then heads south, and in the 30th Street station in Philadelphia, it switches to the Pennsylvania Railroad. They take off the New Haven locomotive and they put on a GG-1, and it heads then all the south into Union Station. So on that particular train, when they switched from the New Haven locomotive to the GG-1, the engineer Brower of the Pennsylvania Railroad had taken over the train and said, hey, terminal brake test is great. Let's get on the road. Conductor said, highball, let's move. And so as it heads south into DC, like any other GG-1 engineer that's taken a train into Union Station, you have to obviously make a brake application further out. And it's about 2 minutes out, he begins to make an application and realizes that the brakes are not clasping like they're supposed to. And so, to make a long story short, this thing goes through track 16, goes through the facade, if you will, through the bumpers of Union Station, and just drops into the floor. I mean, great photographs of this thing. I mean, this GG-1 just went and just dropped, and right into the floor. Beneath that floor was the station came through the station master's office on the ground floor, and in the basement was the baggage room. And so the GG-1 just fell into the basement. On top of that, there's a string of coaches that are just kind of all over the place on track 16. They probably spilled into the adjacent tracks as well. And so it is catastrophe. And now let's keep in mind, this is also in a time period, the 50s, early 50s to be exact, before radios. There is no mass where they can easily just get on the radio to the next station and whatnot. That did not become a thing, if you will, until the 60s. So in this case, the GG-1 is sitting in the basement floor, and people are just, whoa, what is going on? 5 days until Eisenhower's inauguration, people are squirming at the Washington Terminal going, what do we do? What do we do? So what do? Well, they basically rebuild the floor. Now, it's a temporary floor, but they put a massive floor over top of this thing, cover it over, and say, you know what, we'll deal with it when the inauguration is over, because we are expecting huge amounts of people to come into DC for Ike. So they cover it over, and eventually this thing is removed and cut up. I believe it's into 3 sections. I could be wrong on that. But it is removed from the floor and kind of cobbled together. There are bits and bobs of it that are the actual 4876 behind me here. Is it all brand new? No. Did they take bits and bobs of it from 4876 and probably cast some new pieces? Yes. And what I think is really fascinating about this is it came here to the museum, and I don't remember exactly when, but it came here, and there were actually plans on paper to have this thing restored back to its, I would assume, Pennsylvania Railroad scheme, because it rode in other colors, Penn Central, and then I believe it was New Jersey Transit and something else. But there were plans to have it restored, but unfortunately the 2003 roundhouse collapse, the roof collapse, just put the kiboshes on that one. So unfortunately, here it sits. At some point, maybe we'll get to it, maybe we won't. Hard to say. But again, this is a pretty epic story of a GG-1 and how, with 5 days to go before an inauguration, just men and machines put themselves together and they made a temporary solution. All right, so I'm up inside 4876 here. This is facing east, and we are looking at so we'll call it the east-facing engineer stand here. And this would have been where engineer Harry Brower would have sat and looked out his window and realized that, hey, I'm not stopping anytime soon. But credit to him, he stayed at his post, as did the fireman, John Moyer. Who was a Coast Guard veteran, so as a fellow veteran myself, I think that's pretty fantastic. We'll get into a cool story about him in a minute, but let's go into this. So there's what's left of the seat. Here's the dead man's pedal. So you'd have to press on that. So if your foot ever comes off of that, then that's it. Everything stops. No workies. Here's your train brake, independent brake. Sorry. Yeah. Train brake for the cars, and then the independent brake for just the locomotive itself. And let's see here, what else? There's the call button. Nobody's answering me, so that's no good. And there's the throttle, what's left of the throttle. And let's see what else. We got some various switches in here. This thing has been picked over pretty good, so it's not in the best of shape, unfortunately. That's kind of sad, but yeah, so this would have been Moyer, sorry, not Moyer. This would have been Brower's view that day as he looked out. Now, obviously, he's not looking at Carroll Park, but this would have been his setup. So let's go over here, and there's John Moyer's seat. And as the fireman, his sole job would be to sit here and look out the window, and his really only control is the dump valve, or the emergency brake valve, whatever you want to call it. And so this would have been his viewpoint. Got himself a little armrest. So yeah, so John Moyer was a Coast Guard veteran. Again, as a Navy veteran myself, I think that's pretty epic. That he figured out, or he knew from his training days in the Coast Guard, that to brace for impact in anything, he pretty much, and I'll try to demonstrate, but it's kind of difficult here, but he braced himself in between the doorway. Of course, I can't do that because there's a chair in my way, but he braced himself in the doorway, holding on like this on one side and on the other, and pushed his legs, you know, against the frame in order to prevent himself from flying across the locomotive. So he learned that in his Coast Guard days. I think that's pretty fascinating that his training just came back to him just like that. Just never went anywhere. Just he figured out something. He knew how to brace for disaster, and I commend him for that. So let's keep moving here. A couple other things here. This would have been for, I believe, the fusees or torpedoes. And here's one of the doors. I always think this is fascinating with the portholes on them. Probably made Moyer feel right at home. And this would have opened into what would have been the main transformer. So something to keep in mind is that all of the GG-1s that exist today, in any way, shape, form, or fashion, and current fit and finish, none of them have the transformer in them. And why do you say? Well, Trevor, why is that? Well, inside of those transformers, now again, when these things were created, they didn't know this back then, but the cooling agent that was used was PCB, polychlorinated biphenol, I believe. That's how you say it. And this is some nasty stuff. But again, it's used as a coolant that's circulated throughout the transformer, you know, because transformers get hot, they generate electricity, or they step it up, step it down. So this would have been used to cool that. And so when these eventually came out of service, all that was completely abated, it was gotten rid of, and so there is not a single GG-1 out there that has its original transformer in it, or any transformer for that matter. And so they've all been gutted, and so they all look like this. So this would have been where the transformer was. And looking to the west here, this is the air compressor. And that is a huge air compressor. Whew. That sucker is massive. And just on the other side, I believe, is the steam boiler. Let's go over there and have a look. All right, so here's at least a view of the steam boiler. And it's a little hard to get in here and see, but yeah, this would have been used to create steam heat to send out to the passenger cars. All right, so just past the steam boiler here, facing west, is this is the other side of the other end of the controls here. So, like I said, GG-1s operate bidirectionally. Either way, they can move as long as you have a control stand there. And so we go back here. I don't really see anything else here that's of note. There's an operational dead man's pedal. All kinds of fun electrical stuff here. A radio of sorts. And again, these things were pretty well picked over clean after they were retired. Here's another thing for clearly labeled fusees and torpedoes. And let's turn around here. The glass is missing on this one, but this is where there's another porthole door to get inside. In this case, would probably lead you, it looks like, to, on the other side, that's more electrical stuff, but that's too dark to see anything. But move over here to the fireman's side where there is no chair, but there's kind of a cool locker. I like this. So open this guy up. You too can hang your coat and place your hat. I think that's kind of cool. The GG-1s had that in there. Okay, so I have moved again. I'm in the nose, the east-facing nose of the GG-1, and here's the huge traction motor blower for this thing. Look at the size of this puppy. Whew, that sucker is massive, absolutely massive. And if we turn around, we are going to see its friend. There's that connection. All right, so I'm back on the ground here, and something I want to point out, hopefully it shows up on here, is amongst the graffiti that's on here. I don't know if you can see, but there's a P, there's an E. You can just make out, if you look hard enough, Penn Central on this thing. Hopefully this shows up. You can just make it out. Maybe it's only to the naked eye. Hopefully this shows up. But I think that's pretty cool. All right, so I got Washington Terminal Crane 500 behind me. Let's take a closer look at this thing. This is going to be a two-parter. Well, two parts of two parts. We're going to look at, so let's start off with, a wreck derrick is not just the derrick itself. It also has a car that's called a boom idler car, or just an idler car. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll go into the crane itself, and then we'll do views of both, not just from the ground, but up on top, so we can point out some really neat features. All right, so I'm here on the west end of the 501. You can see that. That is the boom idler car of this. And so this whole setup, we'll call it, the whole setup was built in 1913 by the Industrial Works. Well, it was originally they were Industrial Works, then they went to the Industrial Brown Hoist Company. There were name changes, all that good stuff. But this thing was originally owned by the Pennsylvania Railroad, and we'll see some proof of that as we go along. So here's the trucks, and again, time period. They use plain bearings inside of journal boxes here. Bettendorf trucks. And we'll move our way up here, and inside of these guys, now some of these are little C's. This thing has not seen action in God knows how long, but we can get one of these to open, and we do. Surprise. Look at the size of these chains. Holy God. And here is what they call cribbing. We'll get to that in a minute. We'll talk about cribbing when we get to the wrecker derrick itself, but look at all that. You thought your door hinges at home were a pain in the butt. Sheesh. All right, so let's keep moving here. Here's more of that cribbing inside of this. So there were multiple compartments on this thing, and you could store tools, you could store chains, you could store, like we talked about, massive pieces of cribbing. And cribbing is giant oak boards or another hardwood like Douglas fir, something that could really withstand having a load put on it. And that was used to stabilize the crane. We'll get to that in a minute here. So yeah, this is some pretty neat stuff here. All right, so I'm up on top here of Washington Terminal 501, the boom idler car. And I believe what we're looking at here, this whole thing is the essentially ballast, you know, helps weigh the car down. So let's move along. Now, anytime you have a wreck or anything like that, you're gonna have cars obviously that are laying on their sides. They're gonna be all over the place, and sometimes the trucks that the cars were sitting on are completely mangled beyond belief. So how do you fix that? Well, in this case, the boom idler car comes with 2 sets of trucks that they would use to slide underneath these things to get them at least back onto the rails in that kind of fashion. So that's what these guys here are. These would just be used just to get the cars back onto the rails. Let's take a quick look above. I think this is a cool little piece of history I learned. So the Pennsylvania Railroad, when these were first built, if you look up top here, they used this is the main hoist. This is the derrick, and you have 2 hooks. Let's go there first. You have 2 hooks. You have the auxiliary hook, which doesn't really lift as much as the main hook. And it's pretty easy to discern based off the fact that this has 1 single cable pulling it up and down, and that other guy's got 3 massive cables. So that's one thing here. Let's start with that. The other thing that I find really neat is if you look up top, on top of the arm, it's that sheet metal covering it. So as you know, Pennsylvania Railroad was electrified in much of its territory up and down the eastern seaboard. And so anytime you had a wreck or anything that was under the catenary, under the wire, as they say, you would need, now obviously they would turn that section of catenary off so this thing could go in and operate. But just to be on the safe side and to make sure this thing didn't damage or get caught and mangled in the wires, they put this massive covering over it on just this part here, running right along here along the top. So that way there is no way that this thing could, all the intricate parts here could not get caught up in the catenary. All right, so I've moved the east side of the car here, and we get a better view of that auxiliary hook. So that hook would have picked up, you know, freight cars, passenger cars, stuff that's a little bit more lighter weight, in quotes. But when you get to something like a locomotive weighing 200 tons or so, this is the bad boy you want. And we actually get a pretty decent look at that covering to protect it from the catenary. So again, Pennsylvania Railroad, as far as I know, and if you know better, please drop comments down below, but I believe they were the only ones in the electrified territory. Now maybe New Haven did, but I believe they were the only ones that had this particular feature on their wreck cranes. All right, so one last thing here I want to point out on the boom idler car is the huge box right here. Now this would have been used for, once again, cribbing, could be pipes, tubing, tools, but if we pull this guy open, it is mostly cribbing inside. All right, so I'm on the ground here, and I have 500 Washington Terminal Crane 500 behind me. So let's go in and take a better look at this. So first thing I want to point out while we're on the ground here is that this thing was, as I mentioned before, made by the Pennsylvania, or made for, I should say, manufactured for the Pennsylvania Railroad. Here they say the proof is in the pudding. Well, there's your pudding. So something else to kind of note here is that a lot of railroads back in the day, manufacturers for these, so whether it be American Car and Foundry, Pullman, etc., on the trucks, they cast in the railroad to which placed the order, you know, the original purchaser, if you will. And in this case, we got Pennsylvania Railroad. In other cases, if you look at anything that's B&O, you'll see B&O cast into the side of the truck. This would have been a shoring plate, so that would have sat on top of the cribbing. Let's keep moving here. So remember how we talked about the cribbing and what it does? So here, this is one of three. Okay, so let's actually move back to the front. You got these huge I-beams, okay? And what these do is these extend out. You can see the pulley right here. This extends out to one side and then the other. So you have two I-beams. And so this would pull out this way, the other one will go out the other way. And obviously you can see, hey, there's a bit of height difference here. And this is where the cribbing would go. You'd stack the cribbing up until this thing sat on it. And you shimmed it so that way there was no way this thing was going to move this way. Okay, so that's one. That's the forward one, we'll call it. And here's the main guy here. So this sits directly in the middle. You can see how this one uses these gears that as they spin, obviously this pulls it out, and the other side would spin and connect here in the teeth and shove the other one the other way. I think that's pretty neat. Oh. And again, grab irons are always marked in some bright color so you know what you can pull on and what you can't. Again, plain bearings inside of journals. And here's that other one. Here's the other side. So here's the pulley, cord and pulley system here, the wire pulley system. These huge, heavy steel braided cables are wicked. All right, so I know rail fans absolutely love stuff like this, as do I. I have no shame in my game. So here's the builder's plate, W120A. So W standing for wrecker, 120 is the capacity of the boom with the outriggers out, so 120 tons. And A is some kind of submodel apparently. So right here we have 120 tons at 17-foot radius. So this is the capacity with the outriggers out. And with the outriggers not out, so without the outriggers, if it just sits just as we see it, no outriggers, this thing could lift 22 tons. And there's the 1913. All right, so hopefully my lighting works out for this, but hopefully you can see here, this is the bottom of the steam boiler. See the mud ring down there, we see those rivets. What used to be an ash pan. So this was originally coal fired and then it got converted to oil firing, as did most of these Wreck Derricks as time went on. And we look over here, this is one of the wheels. There's one of their set of the, we'll call them trucks that these things pivot on. There's the wheels, there's one. Hopefully you can see the other one. This is a pretty neat view. You can see some pretty good stuff. So let's head up inside and get an idea of how this thing functions. So remember how I was saying these were originally coal fired and they were converted to oil. So here's the burner door. And to the left, to my left, is the bunker itself. So we follow this up. You can see the fill neck is right here. You follow my finger. That's the fill neck. So the fill from the outside fills the tank. And if we follow this down, turn this guy on, fuel flows into here. And they turn this guy on, and you follow this down, and it goes inside of the combustion chamber, or the firebox. Hopefully you can see this. That goes in, and there is the burner itself, and the atomizer is just on top. So that top line is the atomizer. Well, the top line going in goes to the left is the atomizer, and the one to the right is the actual fuel. And so the atomizer sprays it out, or fuel, essentially inside of it, the steam pushes it and turns it into this fine mist, which is a lot easier to burn than a solid fuel itself. I think this is pretty neat as well. So when they converted it to oil, you'll notice that there's a, it's not in there now, but this slides in a channel. There's the channel, like there. And this side and that side would fit into there. And then there was a hoist mechanism here to allow this to go into here. And that was the counterweight down there that allows the door to go up and down. So you could get in there and if you need to do servicing or maintenance. Now I think that's kind of cool. All right, so I'm not going to try to even get into what some of these controls are, because it is a maze of ring and pinion gears and just ring gears and all kinds of other stuff up here. And I've never ran one of these, and frankly, they're pretty antiquated. It's just a maze of pipes. Although it's got some stuff I do recognize, which is a brake valve. Brake valve. Looks to be a Johnson bar here, or power reverse, whatever you want to call it. Probably a Johnson bar. You can see the teeth on it. And like I said, just a maze, an absolute maze of gears and ring gears and just all kinds. Look at the size of that worm gear. I mean, that sucker is huge. So this would have been the view of the Washington Terminal crane operator that morning when John F. Swafford called him up and said, "Hey, we got a problem here, guy." So this would have been the view, and you kind of get a decent idea of, there's not really a whole lot that this is your only vantage point. So you're relying on workmen on the ground to tell you what to do, where to move, because you're pretty much limited by what you can see out the door and what you can see directly in front of you. All right, so I have moved up here. I'm just in front of this hoist here. And here's the actual, here's one of two of the steam engines. We'll use this as a reference. So the valve is in here. Obviously the valve's attached to this inside the steam chest that moves in and out. Here's the piston. This is steam in. As you can see, it comes down. And here's how you blow the water out. And let's see, follow this up. This is the exhaust, which has this funky thing in it. And I guess that's, I don't know what that's for. Maybe a lube line of something? No, because it's in the exhaust. I don't know. Don't know. But here's something that I know a lot of people think is kind of cool, is that they attach the lights. They're just a clamping bracket onto here. So these huge lights, halogen bulbs, to cast and illuminate lights all over the wreck, the derailment, what have you. So most likely these would have been in the on position when 500 was there at Union Station pulling these coaches off of the Federal Express. So I've been doing some reading about these, and read that a good number of these were self-propelled. Now granted, they're not going to be breaking any land speed records, but they were rated up to about 4-5 miles per hour, just to get to and from sites. You know, once the steam locomotive would pull this along with the rest of the wreck consist out to wherever the derailment or wreck was, these things would then kind of take over and move under their own power a little bit. So here's where this is how that works. You have this massive ring and pinion gear here. So this is the driven. Here's the ring. That's the pinion. Now this turns. That looks like through another set of gears. Yeah, it's just nothing but just rings and pinions and rings and pinions to get to where there's the main one. This drives that, and that turns the wheels. All right, well, that was a really, really fun walkthrough of Washington Terminal Crane number 500. So some of the highlights, let's hit the highlights of this thing before we move on here, is again, it was built by Industrial Brown Hoist in 1913 as a coal burner, and eventually for the Pennsylvania Railroad, and eventually in 1930 the Pennsylvania Railroad would sell it to the Washington Terminal Company, which is the company that takes care of, maintains, moves coaches around, yada, 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 down at Union Station. Still to this day, although they're owned by Amtrak. So Pennsylvania Railroad sells it to them in 1930, and then 1947, the boiler is redone, reconfigured to burn oil at that point. So the bunker is removed, the coal bunker is removed, and an oil bunker is then put in its place. And they kept, and I surmise because of the let's see if I can get my finger to work. Because of that covering on the hoist, the main hoist, that would be a selling point to Washington Terminal, because if you've ever been to Union Station, it's a massive catenary. So this thing would have worked out really well in that operating territory. Well, I sure hope you had as much fun watching this video as I had making it. The privilege was all mine. This was absolutely fantastic. I'm really, really glad that I found this and that I was able to share it with you folks. Just something as simple as reading this article by Nick Fry and Ron Goldfeder, sorry if I butchered your name, in a Railroad History magazine, and from a single photo. And there's also corroborating evidence in a book called Union Station, A Decorative History of Washington's Grand Terminal. I'll flash that on the screen for you. Another book that also talks about Washington Terminal Crane 500 picking up the coaches of the Federal Express on that January 15th day in 1953. So again, that's what history is all about. It's about finding things that really enthrall you and make you want to read more and find out more. And I hope you stay tuned to this channel to find out some really cool things that are coming up in the future. Go out and find your own history. Make your own history. And remember, it's all about connections.